Hi, this is Simon Obstill and welcome to another tutorial for Apple Motion. And today we're going to be taking a look at creating this Gothic title effect, complete with cobwebs and rust and all this kind of fun stuff. So as you can see, there are lots of interesting techniques going on there that I'm sure you'll be able to use. So let's get started. First of all, I just want to show you my project setup, 1920 1080, 24 frames a second, and it's 5 seconds long. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set up my group structure. And I think I need 10 groups altogether. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this group 9 times. So I can do that either by right-clicking or using the Command D shortcut. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Base group I'm going to call source. And I'm going to call this next one mat. I'm going to pop the source into the mat. The next group I'm going to call base. Next one I'm going to call extrude. Next one I'm going to call rust. Next one I'm going to call main displace. Next one rust displace. Next one I'm going to call all. New one called background. So BG. Move that to the back of everything. And this one I'm going to call overlays. So it's worth just setting this up to get it all tidy. So base is going to go into extrude. Rust also into that group above the base. And then everything apart from the background is going to go into all, and overlays is going to stay at the top. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to come to my source group here, come to generators, actually let's come up here, generators, color solid, comes in as blue, let's turn it to black. And then I want to copy that into various other groups. So let's copy it into the background group, so that's holding down the Alt or Option key and dragging it in there. Let's copy it into the base group as well and into the main displace group. So let's turn off main displace, extrude. We just want to concentrate on the mat group for now. So I'm going to come into that source group there. I'm going to type some text. So select the text tool. I'm going to type the word rust. I'm using this nice font called Luminary. 480 for the size. Let's alignment to the center. Come over to properties, reset that. Now, I just want a quick little trick here. If you want to get your text lined up perfectly, what you need to do is you need to offset the baseline by 1/3 of the size value. So 1/3 of 480 is 160. So if I type -160 for the baseline, that's now perfectly lined up in the center. It's quite a handy trick, I think. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is I realize that that color solid actually ought to be outside it needs to be at the back of the mat group. So let's move it back to there. So I'm going to make a clone of this mat group. So right click, make clone layer, and I'm going to move that out into the main displace group above its color solid. Then I'm going to turn on this as extrude group, come to the base layer here, and I'm going to import my base texture. And that's going to be this concrete mashup texture here. I just want to increase the size of this so it fills the frame. Now I want to turn on fixed resolution for this. I want to do it for the mat group as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that base layer and I need to add an image mask to it. So right click, add image mask. We're going to use the mat group for the mask source and switch it to luminance. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to take this base group and we're going to add a stylize indent. And we're going to select the main displace as the source for that. So now let's come to that main displace group. So first of all, I'm going to select that clone layer and I'll add a Gaussian blur and a color levels. I want to set my Gaussian blur value to 24. And with my levels here, I just want to crank that black all the way up like that, around about there. Let's come back to our base group here, base group, indent. Let's just set up the indent. So let's have a softness of 0.08. Brightness is fine as it is. Ambient, again, let's go down to 0.08. Highlight brightness, let's set that to 25. Highlight sharpness to 24. Rotation, let's go for 90. And the depth, we're going to set to 3. Now I've made a mistake here, and I've put the indent filter rather stupidly. I've put it on the image mask, and I should have put it on the base group itself, like that. So that's looking a little bit better. And I also need to set that main displace group to fixed resolution as well, so it all matches up, as you see. If I didn't do that, it's out of register. Okay, so then I'm going to take that clone layer and I'm going to duplicate it. Right-click, duplicate, and to remove its 2 filters there. And I'm going to add a whole bunch of filters to this. So first of all, I'm going to come down to Stylize, Min-Max. Then I'm going to add a, color negative. Then I'm going to add a blur, Gaussian blur. And I'll add, just for fun, sharpen, unsharp mask. So let's set up these filters. The min-max I'm going to set to 15. Negative is obviously negative. The Gaussian blur value I'm going to set to 12. And we need to set that blend mode to darken, giving us this nice cutout and also the bevel. So we've got a fairly sophisticated looking text already, but we can make it even better. So we're going to add object, generators, true shade tiles. For the shape, we're going to select arcs, and let's set the size to 15. Come over to properties, set the blend mode to multiply, and the opacity down to 10. And you can probably see if I zoom in a little bit, we've got this really rather nice sort of antique chiseling effect on the bevel. And I just want to add one more filter to this. So add object, generators, noise. Come over to properties, set the blend mode to add, and I'll set the opacity to 15. And hopefully you can see that we've got this sort of rough texture that's applied to that cutout bit there. I think it's quite nice. So now we've got our base text set up, let's have a look at creating this rust. So I'm going to come to my rust displace group here, give it its right name, and I'm going to import a texture, and it's going to be this rust composite, and it looks like this. Just going to zoom it up just a little bit so it covers the frame. And also want to make sure this group is fixed resolution. I also want to add to this group a generators clads. And I actually want to put it below the rust composite. So I'll move the rust composite up. And the rust composite, I'm going to set the blend mode to multiply and the opacity to 50. Let's just have a quick look at our clouds here. I want to set the horizontal and vertical scale to 12. And obviously we don't want any speed because we're just using this as a texture. I'm going to open up the gradient and I'm going to bring these two closer together. We're going to be working on this a bit more later on, but that'll just get us started. So let's turn this group off and close it down for the time being. Let's close down that main displace group. Let's come to our rust group here. And let's bring in that texture one more time. So that is the rust composite. Again, let's just zoom it up so it fits like that. In actual fact, strictly speaking, we want to make sure that we've got this scale the same as our source texture there. So that's 85 there. Let's also set that to 85 just so they match exactly. So we need to do a number of things with this Rust group. First of all, we're going to come to Filters, Stylize, Indent. And we want to use our Rust Displace as the source for that. So let's very quickly set up our indent filter. Softness of 0, brightness can stay at 0.5, ambient down to 0, highlight brightness up to 100, highlight sharpness, let's go for 39, light rotation, let's go for 90, just like the other indent filter, and let's set the depth to 5. So we need to add a couple of image masks to this Rust group. So right-click, Add Image Mask. The first image mask is going to be this Rust Displace group itself, and let's set that to luminance. Let's add a levels to this image mask, and let's adjust it like so. Next, we want to add another image mask, so right-click, Add Image Mask, and let's use the matte as the source for that. Again, switch it to luminance. And what we want to do is we want to set the blend mode to subtract and invert. And now you can see we've got our grungy Rust sitting over the top of our text. Let's zoom in a bit. So this is not quite right just yet because we want to get it away from the edges. And the way to do that is we're going to add a stylize min-max to that second image mask. That's the cutout from the matte. We're going to set that to about 11, I think. And let's also add a levels to that. Color levels. And let's crank it right down like that. Now what I've done here is I've got my lighting round the wrong way. So if you look very closely, you can see that we should actually have shadow there and light on the bottom. So what we need to do is we need to flop this light rotation around. So instead of 90, we need 270. And now it immediately looks right. So the light is coming down from the top. We've got shading underneath there. We've got highlight here on the upper surface. So I want these edges to be a little bit more choppy. And to do that, I'm going to come back to my Rust Displace group. I'm going to select the clouds and I'm going to apply a couple of filters to it. So first of all, stylize, crystallize. Let's set the speed down to 0. And I think you can see that that's just giving it more of a kind of choppy edge, a little bit more Rust-like, I think. And I'm also just going to apply a little blur, Gaussian blur of about 6 on top of that, just to soften it off a little bit. I also want this Rust texture to be more bumpy, so I'm going to come to the Rust composite there in that Rust Displace group, filters, color, levels, and let's just crunch it down. And I think you can see as I do so, we can get a lot more bumpiness into that texture. Okay, so the final part of the design of this is to create that crazy cobwebby displacement of the text. So to do that, we are going to come down to the matte group down here. We're going to select it, add object, generators, and we're going to select caustics. We need to add an image mask to it. So right click, add image mask, and we'll simply use that source there, source text, and drag it into the image mask like that. And we need to invert the mask. So let's come over to the generator. We don't want any speed. Let's set the refraction to 120 and the brightness up to 100. So you need to type that value in because it needs to go beyond the slider. Okay, we can turn this off. And we need to remember to turn back on our source group there, because whenever you add it to an image mask, it turns itself off. And then we'll select that matte group, come to Filters, Distortion, and we're going to look for Bump Map. And we'll use the caustics as the source for the bump. So drag that in there. And immediately you can see we've got this funky effect. Now, depending on the direction, you can get different looks to this. Let's also go for about 0.2 of the, there you go, 0.2 is nice. Gives us lots of crazy things flying off it. If we set a direction of 0, it gives us something else. Again, it's pretty nice. Let's stick with 90, because I like these crazy bits coming out here and off the end of that. But obviously you can just play around with that direction until you get something that you're happy with. So all we need to do is we need to animate that amount. So I'm going to make a keyframe at the start here. Set that amount to 0. And then let's come down to about 3 seconds. Let's set it to 0.2. Come to the end. Set it to 0.25. So now it grows on, getting more and more sort of creepy and funky as it goes. Probably gone a little bit too far, but it gives you the overall idea. So really the only other thing we need to do is we need to sort of give this a little bit more of a look. So I'm going to come down to my background group here. I'm going to import my background MOV. Now I'll put a link to all these textures in the comments for you. So this gives us this nice effect here with some particles, a bit of light. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my overlays group here. And I want to add some lens flare, like that. Let's set the outer color to something like that. The main color to something like that as well. Let's turn down the streak intensity. We don't really want any streaks, they're a bit hokey. Let's move it up to the top like that. Maybe just adjust the fall off so it comes down a little bit more. Let's duplicate it. Right click, duplicate. Let's move it down to 0 on Y. And let's go for negative 960 on X. Come to Properties, Scale. Let's set the X scale to 250. And then come back to the generator. Let's crank up the intensity, adjust the fall off. So we're kind of getting this ghosting in from the side. Let's come back here to the, I realise I've forgotten to add in the extrude. So there's that extrude group there. Let's select that. Let's come to Filters. Let's come down to Stylize. Let's select Extrude from there. So the distance we want to set to 1 and the back size to 0.98. And then let's set the back brightness down to 0 and slightly reduce the front brightness. That just gives us a little bit of extra depth. The other thing I want to do is I want to pop these two displace items into the extrude group like that. They're turned off, so it doesn't really matter where they live, but they don't want to be living on that top group. And I want to make one more group above this all group. Object, new group, drag my all into there. I'm going to set this group to 3D. I'm going to add object light, and then let's move it up here. Let's increase the intensity to about 500. Let's duplicate it. Right click, duplicate. Let's move a copy down to about here. Set its value way down to about 75. Duplicate it again. Move that one over to here. Let's come down to our background group. Need to unlock it. Select the background group. Add generators lens flare. Let's adjust the color and the outer color. And Let's reduce the size down to 50 and reduce the fall off and the intensity. Get these way down. And then I'm just going to move it over here. I'm going to duplicate it. Right click, duplicate. Move it over here, just behind the T like that. Maybe just one more, right click, duplicate. Move it over to the middle like this. The other thing I want to do is I want to come to my base group. I'm going to add a color curves. Just make it a little bit bluer like that, so it contrasts a little bit with the rust. Maybe also just play with the curves on it with sort of metallic. I like to kind of go and do a sort of wavy line on the curve, and it really helps to sort of just ping it out a little bit more. So there's just one more thing we need to do, and that's to animate the rust coming on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rig. So object new rig, and from the inspector I'm going to add a slider. Let's call this rust. Okay, and then I need to try and remember where we need to go. So we need to come into the rust displace group. We need to select that clouds, which is creating the cutout here for the rust patches. And we need to add these two tabs, or the location of those two tabs. We need to add it to our rust slider. So I'm going to drag that onto the rig there. That's the white one. Select the black one, drag the location onto the rig. So at our 0 position, I want my larger number here to be 100 and my smaller number to be 95. And then at our end position here, at 100%, I want my smaller number to be 0 and my larger number to be 5. So that's pretty much everything is rust at that point. So let's come to about 3 seconds on the timeline. Set a keyframe there at 50. Come back to the start. Set that keyframe to 0. And come to the very end here. And let's set that to a little bit more, say like 65. So, oh no, that's too much. Let's go for 52, just so it carries on growing after that initial burst. And let's have a look, see what that looks like. And there's just one final point. You'll remember that the light rotation for the two different indent filters was diametrically opposite. So what we could do is we could create a new rig here, or rather a new slider within that rig. So let's hide the old one. Let's call this one lighting. And what we can do is we can come into the indent filter down here for the base. We can drag the light rotation up into the rig. And similarly, we can come to the rust, indent, light rotation, and drag it up into the rig. And then come over here. So you'll see that one is 180 degrees further on than the other. So at 0, we can set this one to 0, this one to 180, and at 100, we can set this one to 360 and this one to 180. And then it means that we can actually control the overall lighting using this lighting rig. So that's quite a handy little trick. So just before we go, I'd like to point out that because this is a procedural effect, we can swap out the source object for any other. So for example, obviously I can change the font on this. So I'm going to select this one here, and you can see that immediately that's different. But I can also add any other graphic object. So let me import a graphic object that I've made, scale it up, rotate it, and you can see that everything applies equally. All my rust, all my crazy stuff is all there, all updating. So let me just go quickly back to the alternative text. And I just want to show you a couple of other things. So obviously we could use a different displacement for the edge other than caustics. So let's try that. For example, let's come to generators, clouds. Let's turn that off. Let's copy that mask from the caustics to the clouds. And then let's add that clouds to the bump map. Obviously in this instance, we probably want a lot less distortion. It depends on what we want to do. So let's just turn that off for the time being. And I just want to finally just show you something we can do with this bevel. Let's turn off the Trouchet tiles because we want to go for something a bit more industrial. So let's come to this clone layer here. That's the negative one. Let's turn off the unsharp mask. Let's come to the Gaussian blur and let's just increase that value. And as we do so, you can see that we're creating this soft kind of scooped out effect. And that's really quite nice. Very quickly, we've changed it from the way it used to look. And just one final point, I should have probably done this when we were looking at the original version. That's to take that rust layer and just apply an unsharp mask to it. And I think you'll see that that really helps to kick that texture out. In this instance, probably what we do is reduce the highlight sharpness, which is making it look a little bit too shiny, because obviously rust isn't shiny. So, something like that is probably a lot better. And that unsharp mask really helps, I think, to make it pop. So, I hope you found this tutorial interesting. Thanks very much indeed for watching, and I hope to see you again another time.